Thank you. I'd like to bring up the interesting subject of artificial meat, which is another interesting horse race that's happening. I remember after I had been defeated in the Tea Party wave about a decade ago, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life next, and was fascinated by a set of papers coming out of, I think, the Netherlands on cell-based artificial meat, which seemed like the promising avenue at that time. But I was struck last weekend. I stopped at a White Castle and treated myself to a Impossible Slider, which is a 100% plant-based artificial hamburger, and to my mind, or my taste buds, a quite credible substitute. And so I was wondering, there's also a recent article, I think in Science Magazine, questioning the carbon footprint of cell-based meat. That it might actually not be a big win compared to just harvesting a crop and stuffing it through an animal and eating the animal. That in that case, the plant-based approach might be much better from a carbon footprint point of view. I was wondering if any of you have comments on how you view that horse race.
I mean, I think the first thing to say is I think it is a fascinating development, because for many of the people who would inherently be interested in consuming, for example, an Impossible Burger, they may also be interested in organic food. They may also be interested in non-genetically engineered food. And the Impossible Burger represents a highly inorganic, highly genetically engineered meat substitute. So from this perspective, and as a scientist, it represents an incredible way of educating the public as to what is possible, but what one needs to think about when consuming the possible or impossible.
I just want to say one thing about the Impossible Burger is that it was developed by an HMI scientist, one of America's leading scientists from Stanford University, who gave up tenure and HMI funding because he was devoted to trying to solve climate change in any way he could, as Patrick Brown. And this development he's committed to doing this, making sure it's not just a hippie alternative, but it's in White Castle, and it's widely available. And that's a transformative technology. Of course, America leading the way in this use of the most innovative and interesting science to deconstruct the hamburger is really it really shows the power of this kind of technology and the way that it should be supported. And it's very good, too. It's tasty.
I do have one observation here, which is that it's very early. So whatever the assertions are today about the economics, about the environmental cost of production, they will change. And the window that I have into this is not via meat necessarily, but it's human cell culture for therapies. So one of our companies is manufacturing stem cells for therapies. And they have driven the cost down by orders of magnitude just in the last few years. There's another couple of orders of magnitude to go, and they're reducing the footprint of the materials they use, the environmental footprint of the materials they use, as well as the cost. So I have a strong suspicion that whatever the analysis suggests today about the environmental and economic cost of meatless meat it's going to change so much that it's going to be fine in effect.
Any other comments? All right, and another sort of big picture question. Do we have enough farmland? If all your dreams come true, are we going to have, for the number of people, just assume that we keep the population constant in the United States and look at the rate at which we consume transportation fuels, all the other things. When you get all the efficiencies working here, are we going to find ourselves having surplus farmland and turn large fractions of the country back into national parks? Or what's your view of how this will all end up, 100 years from now?
Well, over the long term, yes, we could return substantial fractions, I think, of the land now under cultivation to other use, to natural, there's this old phrase, the gardenification of nature. It turns out that significant fractions of this country were not so natural even when European settlers arrived. They were altered significantly by the native population. So back to that observation that we use about 30% of our corn crop for industrial use already. In that sense, we produce more than enough food in this country to use those raw materials for other purposes. And I think it's also important to recognize there are other technical trends coming that impact that. So I keep a close eye on electric cars and solar and wind, and basically how the electricity grid is changing. And well before 100 years from now, we're going to have shifted transportation use to nearly 100% electric vehicles. And that means that if you plan on selling ethanol as a fuel, that market isn't actually going to be around very much longer. It'd be surprising to me if that were a 10-year market even. So we're going to wind up using those crops to make chemicals much sooner than maybe everyone is anticipating. I mean, Exxon, for example, is investing now very heavily in petrochemicals. I'm not sure that's a wise choice of their investment.
I think one thing I would mention is that whilst it's true that electric vehicles will affect the market for ethanol, there are fuel markets that in which we cannot electrify. And so we cannot I, for one, am not getting on an electrically powered plane anytime in the next 50 years. That is almost certainly not going to happen anytime soon. And so one has to develop low-carbon fuel solutions for sectors where battery technologies simply won't provide the solutions required. And I think that, I mean, within our company, we've developed a technology to convert ethanol actually into jet fuel, ethanol into diesel. And so using a molecule that we can produce en masse from agriculture and from waste streams, and ultimately from CO2, as a platform for the production of high-density air transport, sea transport, and road transport fuels, as well as a platform for a variety of commodity chemicals, makes absolute sense from both an industrial security, energy security, and national security perspective.
I just want to throw my 2 cents in there, too. I didn't mean to say that we won't have any liquid fuels or that there won't be any use for that kind of technology. But I think the world is going to change remarkably over the next 10 years. And if you look at China, just in the last 6 months, internal combustion automobile sales have been crashing, and electric vehicle sales have been going through the roof. And it's going to really alter the way we, very soon, I think about how we use our petroleum resources and our biological resources.
Thank you. And I guess I made the mistake a couple years back of going to one of these websites where you calculate your personal carbon footprint, and found as a member of Congress it was completely dominated by the fact that I fly back to Illinois each weekend to say hello to those who elected me. Anyway, I want to thank the panel. This has been really good, and the chair for having this hearing.
Well.